Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. This is Isaiah Yeshayahu 42a, Parak Membeis, A, the first part, and this is Saul Weinreb, your host for the podcast. The last chapter we studied together was 41, Parak Mem Aleph. And just a quick reminder, in 41, in Parak Mem Aleph, we had God tell all of the nations that it's time to come forth. It's judgment time. It's time for you to let us know what you've been doing, what you've been standing for, what you've been fighting for, and what did your societies create. And it's time for God to mete out the justice. The Jewish people, as we said last chapter, were afraid that God is calling all these nations. It seems like he is now going to reward them. And many of these nations had caused the Jewish people so much suffering. So God turned to the Jewish people and said, don't worry, I'm still with you. I still support you. And to the extent that you fulfilled your mission to the world, to bring justice, righteousness, and teach about me and the ideas of me, God, to the world, you have nothing to worry about. I'm still with you. I still support you. I still love you. Lo ma'asticha, I have not rejected you. And those people that cause you suffering will suffer. So God kept on reminding that among this vision of beautiful peace and justice and righteousness and care for the poor and the rebounding of nature and streams and rivers and flowers and trees and all of this beauty, God will also mete out justice to those that deserve it. And then we also studied that that what exactly it is that God's looking for in justice. Did you feed the poor? Did you give the thirsty to drink? Did you help? Is that what your society's led to? And if not, then you have something to answer for. That's what we just finished. And now, in chapter 42, we go on to read as follows. God addresses someone who he calls Avdi, my servant. There are many different explanations. It says, Hein Avdi et machbo, behold, my servant, I shall support him, or I have supported him. Who is this servant? There are at least four, probably many more explanations as to who this servant is. According to Rashi, the servant is Yisrael, is the Jewish people. According to the Radak and the Malbim, the servant is the Mashiach, the Messiah. According to Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon, he explained it as Koresh, referring to the Cyrus of Persia who brought the Jews back to the Second Temple. And then, according to Ibn Ezra, this servant is referring to Yeshayahu himself, the prophet himself. I'm going to go with Rashi here, that this servant is referring to Yisrael. And the reasons will become obvious as we read through the parak, the reason why I choose this approach. And also because near the end of the parak, we see God referring to the person or the entity that God is talking to. He specifically states that he's referring to Yisrael, and we'll get to that in 42b. In addition to the fact that if we look back to 41, last chapter, verse 8, we see where God specifically says, V'ato Yisrael Avdi, and you, Israel, are my servant. And he's still referring in part to that same Avdi, my servant. Yaakov asher becharticha, Jacob, to whom I have chosen. Zera Avram Oavi. So God specifically emphasized that Avdi is referring to Yisrael, and it's most consistent with the text here and later on in this chapter itself, which, as I said, we'll get to. We also see the same idea in 41:14, where it says, Al tir'i tolat Yaakov mitei Yisrael. Ani azartich no'om Adonai v'go'alech kedosh Yisrael. God again specifies exactly who he's talking to. So I'm going to go with Rashi here. Like I said, it's the most consistent with the text. So, but you're free to choose whichever explanation you would like. Hein avdi et machbo, behold, my servant, I have supported him, or I will support him. Bechiri, my chosen one. Again, the same language that God just used in 41:14 in last chapter. Bechiri, the one who I chose, which is referring to Israel again. Ratzta nafshi, the one whom I desired. Nosati ruchi olav, I have placed my spirit upon him. Mishpat lagoyim yotzi, he shall bring justice to the nations. In this chapter, we are going to find a very, very clear description of Yeshayahu, of the prophet, of what the mission of the Jewish people is and what we were chosen to do. Now, Mishpat Lagoyim Yotzi has been interpreted as meaning that this judgment will be based on how people treated the Jews, right, in the future. A lot of commentaries kind of explain that. In other words, did you treat them properly or not? And based on that, there will be judgment. And there were some hints in the last chapter that God mentioned to the Jews that he will punish those that made them suffer. However, as we read through the context of this chapter, it will make more sense to interpret it differently and say, Mishpat Lagayim Yotzi, that he, my servant, will bring the concept of justice to the nations. And that is his job. And the next verse kind of goes along with this second understanding. Lo yitzak v'lo yisa. He will not even need to cry out, and he will not even need to raise his voice. V'lo yashmiya b'chutz kolo. He will not even need to have his voice heard in the outside. Now here we see, and the commentaries explain, and in the context it makes sense. We just stated before, if we look in chapter 40, verse 9, that the job of the people is to raise their voice. In verse 9 we said, Harimi al tirai, raise your voice. Al har gavo alilach mivaseret Zion, he who is bringing the news of Zion, stand up and call out to the world. And we also saw, again, and remember, I'm going to keep bringing proofs that the same ideas expressed in the so-called first half of Yeshayahu are expressed again here, which just shows a consistency of authorship. But if we look back at Parak Yud Ches 18, verse 3, I'm going to turn there for a minute, where Yeshayahu again stated the same concept and idea, which was, 18, verse 3, where God says, Kol Yoshvei Tevel Kineso Nes Harim Tiru V'chidko HaShofar Tishmo. Kol Yoshvei Tevel, all of the people of the world will listen as the people of Israel raise a sign on the tops of the mountains. We also saw that same idea in chapter 11, Parak Yud Aleph, verse 10, where again that same idea was expressed. V'haya bayom hu shoresh Yishai, the root of Yishai asher omed l'nes amim, elov goyim yidroshu. People will come to him. The people will come. So that's the idea. He will no longer need to call out because he will be bringing that message of mishpat to the nations. Kanerotzutz lo yishbar. He will be a kanerotzutz, a easily breakable reed. Here I'm going to explain the way the Radak explains that a kanerotzutz, if we recall back, is referring back again to the supposed first half of Isaiah, where he compared Mitzrayim, Egypt, who was an unreliable source to rely upon. It was in 36 verse 6, he said that he said the same term. You are going, he said, Hinei batachta, you are having faith on mishenet hakoneh haratzutz hazeh al Mitzrayim. On this easily breakable reed, you're relying upon them. Over here, for the purpose of contrast, he says, however, that the people of Israel in the future will be a kanerotzutz, which is lo yishbar, which will not break. Uvishtok lo yichabena, and it will be a dim, weak strand of flax that will not be something that gets put out easily. Point being, the Radak explains that the justice that is given, that is taught by the Jewish people to the entire world will be so fair and so right and so righteous. And the poor people will be so able to rely upon that justice and that truth that they won't even break that thin reed. That thin reed of support will be adequate. They won't even need that, right? And as the verse continues, le'emet yotzi mishpat, because the justice of the people of Israel, when it's done right, is true justice, which one does not even need that reliance of support. Lo yichya, the next verse continues, verse 4. V'lo yorotz, he shall not be put. The flame shall not be put out of the people, and it shall not be broken. Ad yosim ba'aretz mishpat, until the Jewish people are able to bring justice throughout the world. Ulitorato, and for his Torah, his teachings, the teachings that the Jewish people bring to the entire world, iyim yiyachelu. The entire world will be miyachel. They would long for and hope for the Torah, his teachings that he is coming to teach the entire world. As Yeshayahu said early again in the first half, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah udvar Adonai Yerushalayim. From Zion, from the Jewish people will come out the Torah. And now those those faraway countries, are desperately listening. We want to hear, we want to learn this truth, this justice. And then in verse 5, Ko Omar Ha'el Adonai, so says God himself, Borei HaShamayim, he who has created the world, V'notehem, and stretched out the heavens, Rokah ha'aretz v'tetzoel, and he laid out the world and everything that comes out of the world, all of nature. Notein neshama la'om oleha, he has given spirit, he has given soul to all of those that dwell and build nations upon the world. Beruach lahochim ba, and he has given spirit and life to all that go on this world. Ani Adonai kiraticha b'tzedek, I am God. I have called out to you in righteousness, right? V'achzek biyadecha, and I am holding your hands. Ve'etzorocha, and I created you. Ve'etencha lebrit am la'orgoyim, and I have made you for a brit am, a covenant of nationhood, as a light, to bring light to all of the nations. Now, in this case, this is one of the places where this phrase is used, Argohim. Yeshayahu is here talking to everyone. It says, Kiraticha, I have called out to you, because God just says, I am the Borei Shemayim V'notehem in the pasuk before. I give neshama la'om aleha, to all of the nations upon the world. And if we look at Rashi on that explained, la'om aleha is referring to, and I'm going to read to you the words of Rashi. La'om aleha lechulam b'shavet, to all nations equally. Right? Rashi said over there, I give the spirit of life to all the nations. And I called out to you, right? Because I am, as the Radak points out, Brit Am, the Radak points out, L'kiyum kol am va'am, ki va'avorcha mitzeh haaretz. I have called out to you, right, as a nation, as a covenant of nations, right, as a light to all the nations. That this is a covenant that God is making with the Jewish people, which is a covenant with the entire world. That this covenant is meant to be a mishpat u'tzedakah spread by the Jewish people to the entire world. Here we have Yeshayahu really laying out for us what the entire idea of Or Goyim is. And what's the point? What is that? What are you going to do when you spread this message? Lifkoach einayim livrot. You are going to open the eyes that are blind. Lahotzi mimasker asir. You are going to bring out from the prisoners, from their confinement, the people that are tied down to their worldly, selfish ideas, will have their minds opened, their lives opened. Mibeit kela yoshvi choshech. Those that are sitting in darkness, that don't know, don't understand, you're going to bring them out of the dungeon. Ani Adonai hu shemi, I am God, that is my name. Uchvodi liacher lo atein. I am not giving my honor to anyone else. It is only me, God. Latila psilim. My praise doesn't go to psilim, things that are nothing. And then God continues in verse 9, Harishonot hine va'u. Those things that happened in the past, behold, they have happened. V'chadashot ani magid, and I, God, am telling you the new things, the things that are going to happen. B'terem titzmachna aschem. I am telling you these things now, before they sprout forth, before these things happen. I am telling you what's going to happen. Then God continues in verse 10, a theme which is going to repeat itself and has already repeated. Shayahu has already told us this several times during the first part of this book. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. It is time for all of you, the entire world, to sing a new song. Tihilato, to sing His praise. Miktzei ha'aretz, from all of the corners of the earth. Yordei hayam umlo'o, those of you that travel by the sea, and those of you who the creatures that live within the sea, Iyim, and the faraway nations, Biyoshvehem. Again, God refers to the Iyim, the faraway nations, as, if you recall, in how we discussed, I think it was back in chapter 18, the faraway nations that to which the message of God will come to the ends of the earth. It continues, Yis'u midbar v'arav chatzerim teshev kedar. We did have a mention of the and by the way, I mentioned chapter 18. If you haven't, it would be worthwhile listening to the podcast on chapter 18 to describe how we understood it in this podcast to be referring to bringing the message of God to the ends of the earth. It only makes sense that now God keeps on referring to the Iyim, the faraway nations, the islands all the way out across the sea, and those that travel across the sea. Again, that's a very, very close reference to what was mentioned in 18, when we talked about the ships and the sails that travel to faraway places. Yis'u midbar v'arav chatzerim teshev kedar. Let the Yis'u is from the language that is said several times in these last chapters of Su'u, meaning raise your voice, right? The desert, the wilderness, and the cities and those that live there should raise their voice in the voice of God. Sing the song, the Shir Chadash, which we just mentioned. Chatzerim, the places, the dwelling places, the villages, Teshev Kedar, in which Kedar lives. Now, if you recall, back in chapter 21, verses 16 and 17, was the last time Isaiah mentioned Kedar. And if you listen to our podcast from chapter 21, you will recall how we explained then that Kedar was the quintessential, the tribes of the desert was what it was referring to, and they were very warlike and would cause all kinds of destruction and wars in the desert. We were talking about there, the deserts of Arabia. That's what that was talking about. But then, if you recall, and I'm going to go back to verses 16 and 17 in chapter 21, where God said, "Usha'ar mishpat mispar keshet giborei v'nei kedar yimatu," and the remainders of those that were holding bows, the warriors of the people of Kedar, will get less. Why? Ki Adonai Elohei Yisrael diber, because when God speaks, the people of Kedar will become peaceful, and that's what exactly He's referring to now. It says, "V'chatzirim teshev Kedar yoronu yoshvei selah," those that dwell among the rocks, those people that were sneaking around the desert and attacking others traveling through the desert, will now sing to God. Neirosh harim yitzvachu, and from the tops of the mountains they will call out, and yasimu ladonai kavod, and they will start giving God the honor. Utilato ba'im yagidu, and they will start to say God's praise in all the faraway lands. Because again, just like He said back there in chapter 21, when it's Hashem Elokei Yisrael diber, when it's God that speaks, then the people of Kedar will become peaceful and they will learn the message. Adonai kagibor yetzei. Then what we're going to finish today with this verse 13 in chapter 42. that God will now come out in strength. In other words, we are talking about all this beautiful peace, justice, righteousness, and so on. However, in the future, there is justice. And again, God reminds us that those that have not been acting or behaving accordingly, those that have set up societies that are not kind to the poor, that do not help those that are less fortunate, those societies will get crushed. God will come out, Kagibar, like a powerful, Ki'ish Milchamod Ya'ir Kina. He will come out, and Ya'ir, which was a language used several times in these last three chapters, Ya'ir is where God awakens. He brings out of a place what? Like a person of war. Kina is jealous. Well, can be translated as jealousy, but here it also could be translated as revenge. But more importantly, it's a justice, but a justice of punishment that will come, because in the future time that will also happen to those that deserve it. Yoria af yatzuyach, he will roar or call out. He will even yell al oivav iskabar, and he will be powerful over those who were his enemies. This concludes 41a. Looking forward to 42a. Looking forward to completing chapter 42 and studying it with you. Thank you.